Well, I think it was this, but, well, maybe.
Noise?
Yeah, but maybe.
Set it down.
Maybe, yeah.
Can you see from there?
The other, the back of it.
I'm gonna. No, I'm gonna do that. Oh, I got that. Oh, no, I got that one. Yeah. Okay. Welcome, everyone. This is our 11th annual SSND Earth Conference. And this year, we honor seed, and the title, Story of Seed, Blueprint for Life. If at any time you cannot hear us, would you please raise your hands? Sure. And if is it loud enough for people in the back? Okay, thank you. I am Kathleen Mary Keeman, School Sister of Notre Dame and the co-director of the Center for Earth Spirituality and Rural Ministry.
I am Nicole Soley, intern with the center. Along with the School Sisters of Notre Dame who share this space with us, they, and the School Sisters Earth Committee members are so glad to host all of us. We are grateful that so many of you care for the earth in so many ways, and today, specifically in this conference.
If you have participated in this conference before, excuse me, you'll know someone very special is missing. Lisa Kunz, our other co-director, who has had much health challenges in the past year and needed to resign. And if you have not heard, she is now on hospice. She is doing okay, but hospice means that you are on the last part of your journey. And I would invite us to just pause and send a blessing to her this morning for all the ministry that she has offered us in the last 10 years, and a big part of it was the Earth Conference. So let us pause. And perhaps we could clap for her, and we'll let her know that.
This conference would not happen without the help of some dedicated people. Some of us are here and in the background, and we will acknowledge them. We can applaud all at one time after I've named them. So first, would the Earth Conference Task Force members please stand?
They're in yellow.
Would the SSND Earth Committee members please stand?
They're in orange.
All of us are most grateful for the great support of the Good Counsel staff as well, who are listed at the bottom of the schedule sheet in your folder. Let us thank them in applause.
We are also very grateful for our panelists and our keynote speaker for taking the time and preparing for this event for us. And we will be able to acknowledge them later on too. We also want to make you aware of other people who are giving us some of their time with their resource tables over here. And so during the breaks and that, it'd be wonderful if you could find out a little bit about them. They are Minnesota Interfaith and Light. They are Dream of Wild Health. That one isn't here yet, but she's coming this afternoon. She's one of our panelists. There is Mankato Zero Waste. There is the Center for Earth Spirituality and Rural Ministry. And then the Native Pollinators and Monarchs is another group. And then also Land Stewardship Project. And not that I'm not acknowledging the others, but the director, George Booty, is here, and CESRM has been sole beneficiary of Land Stewardship Project, and George has been the director for 18 or 19 or maybe even longer, 23 years. And he is transitioning into that, out of that position, and so I'd like to have us applaud him because of his generous work with that organization. Yep, George. Oh, and I forgot, Sisters Kay and Nanette have some information over there too. Thank you. The Advent wreath. Bathrooms are available. There are 2 over here, and if you go out the hall and to the left, there are a couple there. And if you like to climb steps, you can go up the steps from where you came down. And if you turn to the right, there are women's bathrooms and men down the hallways. We call it the rounding, and you'll know why we call it the rounding, because the hall rounds. So. This conference is sponsored by the School Sisters of Notre Dame, and that particularly the Earth Committee and the Center for Earth Spirituality and Rural Ministry, which we call CESRM. There are new directions and needs for CESRM, and so I invite Jim van der Haar, a member of the CESRM Advisory Committee, to share about this.
Good morning. I spoke to you last year on the same subject, for those of you that were here last year, and this year the message has taken on an even more important tone. CESRM has been in existence as a fully sponsored mission of the School Sisters of Notre Dame, kind of a sub-group of the Earth Committee for 20 years now, going on 20 years. And as I told you last year, the School Sisters of Notre Dame are in kind of a crisis mode right now. They're all aging, their members are dwindling, and that also equates to lower revenues. So they're looking at all their programs and trying to decide what they can fund, how they can fund, and what's necessary. So we're in the process right now, at their request, of working to become an independent 501c3 nonprofit organization, which means we're going to have to do more of our own fundraising. We're also, at the same time, taking a look at becoming a much more aggressive organization. I think, I know Lisa had big plans for this organization throughout the years, and she was kind of held back by this whole conflict with the funding thing, and so we're looking to do that. So in your packet, there's a pledge thing. We would appreciate you supporting us. There's a list here of suggested donations and what those might sponsor. Doesn't mean if you give $100, we're only going to buy magazine subscriptions. That just gives you some idea what it will do for us. So I made this pledge last year, and we had some good results from it. I'm hoping that we'll get even more this year. And stay in touch with us, because there's going to be a lot of information coming out about the new organization and what our requirements are, probably within the next 6 months to a year. I mean, it's a work in progress right now. We're not sure where we're headed, but it's definitely going to be a different direction for CESRM. Also, in addition to money, we can also use your time. And so there's going to be a sign-up sheet at the Session booth back here. Feel free to sign up. We don't have any specific responsibilities. You can sign up. If you're interested in volunteering, we may call you as simple as making a phone call or helping with the gardens or whatever, and you feel free to pick and choose what you like. But we'd like to get a good baseline of volunteers on our rolls so that we can go through and call and get people to help us out. So to some degree, the future of SESRM is in your hands right now. I've been a part of the advisory committee for 5 or 6 years. I'm not sure exactly how long. And like I said, it's a really agonizing process right now, particularly for a lot of you that have been involved with us over the years. But as Karen Kaiser-Clark said, life is change, growth is optional. And we're looking at growth. So thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Now,
We probably will specifically need volunteers for the upcoming winter solstice. So that's, kind of the next thing that we will need help with. And I would also like to say that as part of the 501c3 process, we're going to be meeting a board of directors. So if you think that you would be somebody that would be well suited to the session board, or you know somebody, please contact them.
thank you, Lynn. So for those of you that may not have been able to hear that, Lynn was pointing out that we are going to be needing help to host our winter solstice. So that is something that if you're interested in volunteering for that, you can come and talk to any of us with a highlighted name tag so you know who we are. And we're also going to be looking for a board of directors in the future. So keep that in mind. So now let us come to our theme. I'm going to go over a brief outline of what's in your folder. And some of this we've already talked about, thanks to Jim. So the yellow sheets, we would love to see those come back. We'd love to see your pledges of donations. There is a schedule for the day. That's a sheet in white. That should be the first thing that you saw in your folder. On the left-hand side, there is a small half sheet of seed quotes. It's printed in color. Those are for you to look at and reflect. There's an advocacy network form. One of the educational projects of the center is to affect good policies at the state and national level. Advocacy efforts in larger groups help us to accomplish this goal. You are invited to join our network of around 85 people to do this. There is also an evaluation form. Your insights are greatly appreciated as we plan for each conference. There's a box available at the back table for you to fill those out and place in so that we can get your feedback for next year. There's also a time, talent, and treasure form. And this, I believe, Kathleen Mary, is for people who may be interested in volunteering or being a part of. Yep, and that will be at your table.
No, that will be at our table.
Oh, that's at our table. So you can come back and visit us at our table. It's the table with the big blue board. It says our name on it. That's for people who might be interested in that board of directors. There's also a 3x5 card for us to use later if you have questions for the keynote speakers. So we'll be using those and we'll run around and collect them so you can write your questions on those later on in the day.
One of the things that we appreciate doing with the Earth Conference is to have a time to center ourselves with Earth. And so I invite you to take out that schedule because there will be a community response in there. You see it's bolded as part of that reflection. In this conference, it is our hope that we have all gathered to strengthen a relationship with our kins, and especially our kin, the seeds. Also, to strengthen a relationship among each other, so that we can increase our hope and courage in the work ahead. And then also our relationship with our own self, because in deepening these ideas, we become more true to what we want to be. So let us concentrate on our breathing right now. We always breathe in and out, but to concentrate for a minute on that so we can place ourselves here. We come to this place and time. Breathe in the gift of life. Let us let go of other matters in our life. They will wait for us, and come to this place and time. Again, we concentrate on breathing in and out the gift of life. How wonderful that we can spend time with seed. I don't think we often do that, do we? Please take a seed from the center of the table and with your hand open, put the seed there. Let us put our minds and our hearts with this kin of ours. As we hear some words describing the seed's power and wonder. Bandana Shiva writes, "The seed in its essence is all of the past evolution of the earth, the evolution of human history, and the potential for future evolutions." This is what we are holding. Past life, future life, universal energy, mystery, sacredness, divine. What power and beauty and hope are in this seed? Imagine all the seeds of our planet. What power and beauty and hope. We want them to be the best that they can be. We too are seed. We have evolved and continue to share life and pass it on. What power and beauty and hope are in us? We want to open ourselves to become the best that we can be. Judy Leaf writes, "It is our responsibility to protect both our external seeds and our internal seed of awakening for the benefit of all being and that of future generations." It is our responsibility to protect our internal seed of awakening for the benefit of all beings and of future generations. So we come together on behalf of seeds. Let us silently commit ourselves to this day. Then let us join as a community and respond with the words on your agenda. Nourish beginnings, let us nourish beginnings. Not all things are blessed, but the seeds of all things are blessed. The blessing is in the seed. So we begin. And we invite Mary Tashney to come forward to introduce our keynote speaker.
Good morning. Good morning. We're delighted to have Bruno with us this morning. Bruno Borsari is an agronomist, and he teaches at the State University of Minnesota in Winona. Bruno received his doctorate of agricultural science from the University of Bologna of Italy, and his PhD from the University of New Orleans. He has taught and practiced ecological farming, agroforestry, prairie restoration, among other things, in Italy, and for 30 years in the Republic of Central Africa and Sierra Leone. It was in Sierra Leone where he met his future wife, Julie, who was in the Peace Corps at that time. Julie, would you stand, please? In 1989, they came to the United States. He's a citizen. It's important to know that today, isn't it? Most recently, he received a Fulbright grant for work with local subsistence farmers in Colombia. Panama. There and other places, Bruno has seen firsthand the issues concerning food security. Being Italian, Bruno's final words to me were, "I grew up with a passion for good food, and I maintain a deep interest in growing nutritionally good food." We welcome Bruno and his wife Julie to this conference.
Well, good morning to all. Thank you, Sister Mary. Thank you, Sister Kathleen. They have been my mentors. I feel like Dante. My Virgils, Sister Mary and Kathleen, through Archangel Doug Nopar from LSP, came to visit in Winona in June, and since then, not only I've been following their guide to this great day, but also their philosophy. I've been imbibed with the approach to sustainable living that the Sister of Notre Dame want to practice. And this hospitality that Julie and I have been benefiting since yesterday really proved with great delight that you are really doing great work, and I'm honored to be part, even though ephemerally, just for this day. But I can envision that our relationship will get stronger and stronger in the future. Okay, I'm a U.S. citizen. And it doesn't matter what is going to happen, I'm going to stay. Okay? So here today I'm bringing to you some stories about my experience, some stories about my ancestors, some stories about what I have experienced living during my juvenile years, trying to find my path in life as a young agronomist with the great vision of providing food to all. Because like I learned from grandma, if you don't eat, you're gonna die. And you gotta eat a lot, right? To stay healthy and strong. And so one thing, now that I'm growing older, although well-fed, as you can see, is that we are living apparently in a world of abundance when we talk about food, but very unfortunately there are millions of people, including in our great state of Minnesota, that go to bed at night hungry. And as I have been learning, and as I am learning, because I remain very interested in this topic, is not really a matter of producing more food. It's more a matter of giving people easy access to food, giving access to land. And as an educator, one of the biggest drama that I'm living at present is that as I'm growing older, with my great pride of having spent weekends at Grandpa's farm in the old motherland and helping him and uncles to spread the manure from the little barn at this time of the year as the land was becoming prepared for sowing wheat for the following growing season, none of my students, or not too many of my students, or even my own children understand what it is, this attachment to the land that inevitably we have to maintain because that is where our food is coming from. And so I think the theme for this conference could not be most appropriate, because everything starts with a seed. And so my story, I'm going to take briefly on a tangent, because actually if we look at the evolutionary history that brought us here, okay, plants have been on Earth much longer. At least this is what the fossil record and evidence suggests. And so the production of seed has been the evolutionary adaptation of the first ancestors of plant species that with perseverance, with tenacity, they have been able to adapt to catastrophic events, to the coming of the glaciers, to the withdrawals of the same, to floods, to tsunamis, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and they're still here. So when I think about seed, I think about hanging in there. When I think about seed, I think about patience. When I think about seed, I think about renewal. When I think about seed, I think, who am I, who are we as human beings? Because, again, we go back in time and plant communities became established with some approximation between 350 million years ago. I mean, if you look at the possible big speculations here, but again, from geology, evidence suggests that even the geography of our planet was very different at that time. The Earth began to emerge, and life began to colonize terrestrial ecosystems. So plants are autotrophs, we learn in biology. They are like little photovoltaic systems. They just absorb sunlight, they fix the carbon in the atmosphere, and they convert that carbon into glucose, into sugar. When I think about seed, I think about energy, because the embryo of the seed stores in its endosperm a lot of glucose that gives that little inconspicuous speck life to sprout a rootlet, to sprout a little stem, the first leaf that will begin like a solar panel to attract light and carry on its growth, its development. So when I think about seed, I think a lot of different things. And I'm humbled by the fact that, as you see from the posters that I brought, so obsolete educational materials that were used during the prehistoric ages when I went to school, I found them in a locked cabinet on the 3rd floor of the herbarium at Winona State. I bow down to them. as I was wiping the dust, because now we can find maybe photographic images of all the seed or plants you want on Google Image, but yet I was humbled by whoever was the artist that put these drawings together. So on my left, you see the plant of a sunflower, and everybody's familiar with that, right? So what we call seed, actually the teacher or the professor in botany would say, no, that is the achene. It's a fruit. The seed is inside, okay? Do you see the pea plant on the right side? That is a legume, and the seeds are growing inside the fruit that we call the pod. So the story of the plant leads inevitably to make us understand more about the seed. Did you read Michael Pollan, Botany of Desire? Okay, how plants are basically tweaking and manipulating even our own lives. They sure do. And they have been doing that for millions and millions of years, even before we came as a species, because they have been attracting animals, pollinators, okay, birds, almost any other species of living organisms that, like plants, cannot make their own energy. And how have they been able to do that? By producing succulent fruits that animals figured and understood easily contain the energy for them to grow, for them to nurture their little ones. And so this idea of evolution that is still so challenging to bring to the discussion in an educational environment, I don't think should be so hard to embrace, because besides being supported by strong scientific evidence, it's also, in my opinion, as a biologist, a great story of humility, a great story of cooperation. And in fact, what we learn more and more as we study the establishment changes and adaptation of population on the environment is that they will have the best chances if they work all together, if they cooperate. So look at the plants here in the posters. Look at the flowers that they can make. The flower is the last change that occurred 300 million years ago. The plants with the beautiful colors of their flowers began to advertise, look, I'm ready for reproduction. And so the pollinators going to them, and since plants cannot move, the pollinators made possible the reproduction of plants. And then when that flower sets after pollination being completed, the fruit begins to develop. And we have different kind of fruits. Okay, some are hard, some are can split open, some have an edible sugary pulp. Okay, but we came into the picture just in a speck of time, because I don't know if you have reflected about more than 300 million years, 350 million years. It's an incredible amount of time. So imagine, okay, from the record of measurements that can be made by geologists that are dating our rocks, we go back billions of years. If we would convert this geologic time scale into a scale of a typical 1 year period, the plants, okay, and their association with the pollinators is something that happened around, early May, early June, okay? Our species appears in this geologic time scale on December 31st at 11:59 p.m. So we are December 31st, 11:59 p.m. The clock is ticking, tick, 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 tick. In this last minute, okay, we invented agriculture about 10,000 years ago. We sent men to the moon, and here we are talking about seeds. So we are really the youngest kids on the block as a species. And so what brought now that pea plant or that sunflower to the shape as represented in the poster by the artist is basically the input brought by our farming ancestors wherever they settled, because they saw potential to support their kids and their communities with something edible for them. Hence began plant breeding. Okay? So again, when I think about seed, I think about endurance, tenacity, I think about patience, I think about humility. Okay? Because we invented agriculture, and so our ancestors 10,000 years ago began to see that by saving some of this seed and putting it back on the land wherever they lived, they were able to grow a new crop the following year, and that is great. That helped them to emancipate themselves from following the herds of big game, or for having to migrate as the big herds of animals have been doing since the end of the last glaciation 20,000 years ago. And that is how civilization started. Okay? So mankind was able to establish itself. And so we have on our planet certain regions that, again, evidence suggests, became the very important centers of agriculture. One of these, which is very well known to all of us, is that Middle Eastern region where there is all that conflict going on because of the rush to get to the access of the last few barrels of oil. Okay, what was called the valley, between the Euphrates River and the Tigris River between Iran and Iraq is, according to the evidence, where, at least in the northern hemisphere, 8,000 years ago, again, big variance here, but archaeologists, historians, botanists, scientists found evidence of the first settlement of humans that were able to build their communities and establish their communities because they had found a way through plant cultivation of coming back to the same land, plant again, store the seed, and begin the cycle, following the cycle of the seasons, okay, developing this great human primary activity, which is agriculture. So what has been happening since the last 10,000 years? Well, if you look at the history of agriculture, seed saving has always been pretty simple, okay? Humans, just by looking at how certain plants look like or certain fruits and their seed taste, they selected those and saved their parts, their seed, to be planted the following year. Okay? So the type of selection, what Charles Darwin calls artificial selection, is really very, very simple. You look at a rose, you look at a flower, you keep the seed of that plant because is the phenotype, is the external visible characteristics of that plant that attract you, or that maybe do something good for you, okay? So maybe the first wheat plants, okay, must have been very different from what we find nowadays in the big monocultures of Saskatchewan or Europe or wherever wheat is grown, maybe even here in Minnesota. But definitely the criteria of our ancestors to store and keep that seed must have been because maybe they were most productive. Maybe the seed was the plumpest of all, okay, containing that sugar, that glucose that the plant stores throughout the months of photosynthesis, okay, even without having laboratory equipment or anything. People saw that by eating the grains of that plant, not as many kids were lost during the bad season or the season of scarcity, okay? And so that is how selection started. And that has been going on for thousands of years, okay? How can I tell you this? I can tell you this because in my studies of agronomy, one of my heroes is a Russian scientist. His name was Nikolay Vavilov, okay? Nikolay Vavilov, I don't know if you've ever heard this name. He lived in the 1920s in Russia. So Apparently, he was the son of a wealthy family. He had the opportunity to study, and he was very intrigued by this question. Okay, where did our ancestors first settle, and what are there any places on the planet that could be considered where our major staple food crops are coming from? So Vavilov spent the 1920s traveling extensively throughout Eastern Europe, Asia primarily, and in St. Petersburg, he established the first germplasm, the first seed bank. So a seed bank is a big collection of seed. And now more than ever, we need to support seed banks. There is one in the United States, for example, in Colorado, okay? They have collections of seed, of varieties that you not find anymore. I have here few seed catalogs, okay? Tom Seeley, who is the CEO of Seed Savers, okay? I was reading in an article, in an interview with him, we have been losing in North America between 1984 to 1998, so in a span of like 14, 15 years, the 88% of all the vegetables varieties of plants. So in the early 1980s, he was arguing we had something like maybe 5,000 or around 5,000 different varieties. In 1998, that number has shrunk to a few hundreds, maybe 500, 600 varieties. And that shrinking is still going on because during the early 1980s, scientists who had figured out the structure of DNA, which is the magic molecule that all living beings possess, and a plant stores that DNA in its embryo, well, scientists began to play with that DNA and began to develop the technology that has brought to the development of transgenic seed. And I understand that you watched a very interesting documentary the night before yesterday, where maybe you have learned the technicalities of GMO. I don't want to talk about that. Maybe this afternoon in the panel, there may be an opportunity to go there. But I want to bring you to your attention the time scale. So we have millions of years of adaptation by natural selection. Plants beginning to colonize terra firma, so to speak, all the continents, adapting to their climate, adapting to their different zones, to their pedology, the characteristics of the soil. And then we have had thousands of years in these few centers of cultivation, like Vavilov described in his writing, the one in Central Asia, another one in Central Mesoamerica. So these are the places where our staple food crops came. So from the Middle East, for example, barley, all the cereal grains, wheat, some vegetable species, onions, garlic, I think watermelon also comes from there. From the Americas, the Mayans, the pre-Incaic civilizations, they had their own culture of storing seed and doing agriculture. When the conquistadors, Columbus, Uncle Christopher, right, came to the Americas, brought back to Europe a lot of new plants. So it's also interesting, now at the University of Bologna, where I have been studying, which is a very old school, there are agronomists that are really focusing their research on agroarchaeology. And you know where they go? They go to arts museums to look at the paintings of artists in the 15th, 16th century. Okay, I have learned from a Canadian ecologist years ago at a conference in ecology that after the collapse of the Roman Empire, okay, and with the development of Christianity in Europe, the Colosseum became a dump. So there are pieces of art, paintings of all these vines, all these plants, all these fruits that were emerging from the dump, from the Colosseum. It's very interesting because now agronomists go and look at those paintings to try to figure out what kind of genes, let's say, among watermelons we have been losing, how grapefruits, looked like at the time of the Medici in Florence, of Leonardo da Vinci, right? So we are, or at least some of these scientists have become really sensitive to the idea that where is all this germplasm gone, okay? Because once a variety is not commercial anymore and we pitch it from a catalog, if there is nobody there interested in maintaining that variety, it is gone forever. The biotechnologists will tell you, don't worry about it, because we are in the process of even being able to build from atoms and molecules genes, and we will be able to do that probably very soon, right? The technology, I think, is out there. But that is not the problem. I think at the base of this paradigm shift in seed saving is that in a blink of an eye, in terms of time, we have obliterated the culture from different ethnic groups and different kind of foods of storing and saving seed for a model of of seed production for, as it is professed, the future of food security. That is first of all extremely homogeneous, and where, and that is the thing that as a biologist I find hard to understand, is not anymore the plant and its seed adapting to the whims and the changes occurring in the environment, but is the other way around. Now we have the technology, we transfer a gene from an organism that doesn't have anything to do with a pea or with a sunflower, and our expectation is that the environment will adapt to the technology that we have ingeniously devised. So what I'm seeing around, okay, is the whole planet, our little blue planet, becoming uniformly very homogeneous, okay? I mean, look at our Minnesota. Yesterday I was driving away from my beautiful bluff country, okay? And as I entered the grassland, where I was thinking, the Dakota here were hunting their bisons, probably even a few hundred years ago, right? Before we displaced them. Now the farmers were applying manure, tilling the soil, preparing those thousands and thousands of acres for the 2017 corn crop. And that corn crop, the seed, where is it coming from? Is not as diverse as the diversity that you see in these few ears of corn that I'm holding. The diversity has been shrunk to the bare bone, okay? And so, biologically, that is a great danger. And humanity should know about that, because if you are of Irish ancestry, I'm sure you have heard the story of the Phytophthora, the fungus that destroyed the potato crop in the 1840s and brought your ancestors from Ireland to North America, okay? So what did we learn from that lesson? But again, we will maybe reflect about that and as we continue the discussion. So here, I think that more than ever, the idea of saving seed, saving germplasm, it's like should become really a movement, and in a way it is a movement, because Tom Seeley, since the 1975, you know, not too far from here in Decorah, Iowa, there is a large group of seed savers around this organization that is preserving germplasm without much funds coming from the federal government, but they're doing it. So this is a grassroots movement that I think deserves our greatest respect. And what I've been learning is that saving seed is actually very simple. So even if you have a few square feet of garden and you grow one vegetables and you got those seeds from maybe your grandparents, please share those seeds, continue to grow that variety, because that is what food security, after all, is all about. So when I also think about seed, about the attributes I was telling you a few minutes ago, I think about community, I think about cooperation, I think about sharing, I think about generosity. And in fact, I'm not an anthropologist or an historian, but I have been reading, I have been hearing stories from my native country, from also countries where I lived, where the seed is really the patrimony of a society. Okay? And so to go back to Vavilov, because I want you to remember the name of this great guy. He established the first seed bank in Russia, in St. Petersburg. But unfortunately, when after the Russian Revolution, Joseph Stalin eventually got to power, so we are in the 1940s, in World War II. Vavilov, because of his noble descent, wealthy family, was immediately an outsider. Okay, so he must have not been that good because he was not a child of a working class, Russian working class. And so there is a biologist in the history of this tragedy called Efrem Lysenko, who was a friend of Joseph Stalin, who began to defame the character of Nikolay Vavilov. Okay, so the famous quinquennial plans in the soft cots, in the cold cots. I know that because I studied in Europe, so the Russians were much closer to Italy than to the United States. And so in agronomy, these kind of models were brought up to the attention of me and my fellow students when we took those classes. So the idea of agriculture that Vavilov was proposing, saving seed, maintaining open pollinated varieties that have been saved from generation to generation. Lysenko was whispering at the ear of Stalin saying, Vavilov is just saying a bunch of baloney. No, we need to do instead other things. And the approach by Lysenko was absolutely anti-scientific. For example, yeah, let's soak our seed before planting them in cold water, and that is how they will develop tolerance to frost. Okay? So absolutely anti-scientific. But you know what the story is? The story is that Nikolay Vavilov in 1941, so the Germans are invading now Russia, okay? Winter of 1941, St. Petersburg is under siege. Vavilov has been arrested by the KGB, the Russian police, and is brought into a gulag in Siberia, where he's tortured and everything. And during that winter, in the city of St. Petersburg, more than 1 million people died of famine. In the Vavilov Institute, there are bags of potato seeds, of beans, of peas, and everything else, with a whole staff of researchers that are cataloging, that are conserving, preserving, and maintaining all this collection. They could have saved themselves. Well, they all died of starvation too. Okay, so this is really the tragedy. And the father of germplasm conservation, Nikolay Vavilov, eventually died of starvation and disease in this Russian prison camp in Siberia. But his legacy is not lost. But unfortunately, okay, the former USSR, with the fall of the Berlin Wall, then had a big economic collapse. And so the Vavilov Institute is still standing, but I think a handful of researchers are left that are just trying to survive. But at the same time, the situation is not any better in the Western world. So again, what are we learning from these stories? I think that we are not really learning much because, again, we are obliterating the knowledge, the culture of producing viable seed, of passing seed from generation to generation as our early farming ancestors eventually learned, and we just put all our investments in terms of resources for the future on this very apparently attractive technology of manipulating the seed DNA. But the more I learn about it, and the more I think that we really don't know exactly what we're doing. Okay, and why am I telling you this? Because I remember when I came to the US in the mid-1990s, okay, as a biologist, as a professor. I had quite interesting conversations when I lived in Louisiana, and I felt that there was in the academic field a lot of enthusiasm for now having herbicide-resistant soybean, okay, or BT corn. You know what I'm talking about? So that is when those seeds of those two major crops became available for farmers. The corn was resistant to the toxin produced by the Bacillus thuringiensis bacterium. So the promise of the agro-industry was, well, if farmers begin to plant our seed, they will definitely reap the benefits. And this kind of agriculture is also doing a great service to the environment because less insecticides will have to be sprayed. When soybean herbicide resistance became available, the same mantra was professed. Yeah, you will have to apply almost no atrazine, no other form of herbicide. Imagine what kind of benefits the environment will get when it comes to water quality, for example, and the health of the farmer and rural communities. Well, if you look at the statistics, unfortunately, this has been a big lie. In the last 20, 25 years, since the marketing of the first transgenic soybean and corn seed, the rise and use and abuse of pesticides in agriculture has been tremendous. So now we are at a point where, again, the agro-industry is holding pretty much the monopoly of corn, soybean, cotton, canola, okay? And if you look at the world map, we are the leader. The United States is the leading country in the world for transgenic crops, followed by few other big countries in the world. Canada, okay, that bought into it. And then in South America, we have Argentina and Brazil. Okay, Argentina and Brazil, I don't know if you have ever been there. I have not been there either, but there are some interesting documentaries about what the real benefits Brazilians and Argentinians gained by embracing this technology. Again, it all boils down to money. 1998, the big collapse of the Argentinian economy. So the government said, welcome biotechnologies. This is a way to resuscitate the big inflation and big economic crisis we're going through. And that is what they have been doing for almost 20 years. But there are some stories now of public health due to the deterioration on the environment because of the abuse on large farms of chemical products and the effect on public health that is really, really scary. But you don't hear this information very much, okay? But again, you don't need to go that far because even in our little rural communities, where you have a high reliance on modern genetic engineering agriculture, most likely you have problems with pollutants in water. You have problems with sediments in water. You have other kind of cascading effects, high nitrates and other nutrients that contaminate water. So if you have water from a well at the farm, talk to the farm. Most likely they may not even drink it. Okay? Have you ever heard about the baby blue syndrome in Iowa already since the 1970s? We have water contamination by nitrogen. Nitrogen, the story of nitrogen is also very interesting to understand why biotechnologies have been reaching the high power that they did. It all has to go back to a little bit of history of chemistry. So let me rewind. Let's go back a little bit. We are now in the mid-19th century, so 1840s. In Germany, this chemist, his name was August von Liebig, okay, did studies germinating seeds and looking how well the seedlings respond to certain chemicals. Well, nitrogen, he wrote in his paper in the mid-1800s, is really the element that makes the plant grow so lush, so green, okay? And you want to see that green because that is amplifying photosynthetic activity, okay? And then 50 years later, the Germans, big chemists, they invented the system of fixing nitrogen directly from the atmosphere. So the Haber-Bosch process was invented, 1909, so we are exactly 100 years ago. What were we doing in Europe 100 years ago? We were annihilating ourselves. Oh, thank you. Because it was World War I. So that nitrogen is the prime ingredient to build bombs. And so the Kaiser benefited from the discovery of that process to make explosives. Then World War II comes to an end. The military arsenals are filled with nitrogen. Agronomists rediscover the knowledge that Liebig had written about in 50 years earlier. And where is all that nitrogen going? On the land. So this idea, this paradigm of agriculture, okay, that for thousands of years had been very connected to what we would call nowadays ecology. So the farmer following the seasons, understanding the fertility of the soil, using form of fertilization derived from organic material like animal manure. Now, in the 1920s, so this is 20th century agriculture, the paradigm of production takes off on the chemical tangent, okay? And then we get to the 1960s, 1950s, population begins to grow, okay? I was born in 1961. I've been reading that when I was born, the world was populated by about 2 billion people, 2.5 billion people. If you were born before 1961, the population has always been stable below the 2 billion marks. How many are we now? More than 7 billion, okay? So population began to grow because of that idea of applying fertilizers, synthetic fertilizers. So if we apply synthetic fertilizers, then the whole agricultural industry, the whole agronomic schools, at least in the Western world, began to think, heck, we better do something about selecting plants that respond to the maximum to all this nitrogen, right? And so guess what? In the 1960s, 70s, boom, the so-called Green Revolution. Okay? 1970, Professor Norman Borlaug, University of Minnesota, is awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. And if you listen to the interviews with Professor Borlaug, I think he passed a few years ago, he supported the idea on the assumption that this breeding approach that he had proposed was going to defeat famine from the world. There was a need to increase agricultural output in order to defeat famine from the world. And so his contribution to agriculture was basically, we are before genetic manipulation, breeding plants, agricultural crops, to make them dwarf. So the idea is smart, is brilliant, because if the plant is sequestering carbon to make sugar, and all that sugar is sunk in the seed, right? I don't want that carbon to be distributed through the stem, in a longer stem, or in larger number of leaves. I want all that sugar to be in the panicle, where the seed is growing. So dwarfism is a great gene, is a great character. So through hybridization, okay, crops, especially for wheat, because that is the species Borlaug concentrated on, became much shorter. All right? But then what's the problem? Okay, so Green Revolution. Professor Borlaug claimed in his late days that he saved hundreds of millions of people's lives in the 1960s and 70s. And this eventually cannot be denied. But I think what was not envisioned with this kind of agronomic approach that now was hybridizing the seed was that now, in order for that wheat hybrid, okay, so more productive in our terms to fulfill the needs of feeding more people, required many more agricultural inputs. And so this is the big critique, for example, that environmental activists and scientists like the Indian Vandana Shiva is bringing to the table when she is talking about the disaster that Western technologies in seed production and conservation have brought to millions and millions of small-scale farmers in our country. Okay, because now you have hybrid seed. So a hybrid is a seed that has been selected for specific characteristics. And so very pragmatically, what do we want to have in a hybrid seed? High yield, resistant to disease, maybe resistant to weather changes, let's say more resistant to an early frost or something like that. So just few little characteristics. Maybe if we are breeding an apple, we want a longer shelf life when we sell it on the shelf of a supermarket, okay? But in the whole genetic package of the DNA stored in a seed, we have many more genes than this. So with hybridization, we have basically focused on very few genes, and we have achieved higher productive varieties. But definitely these high productive varieties were not what millions and millions of farmers in the developing world needed, because then to take care and make productive a hybrid seed, you need inputs of production that most likely in a poor country you will not have. Machinery, fuels, energy, agri-chemicals, herbicides, fertilizers. Okay, so Vandana Shiva is most lately talking about the tragedy that has been affecting the cotton producers in the Punjab region of northern India, where, for example, many of these farmers bought into the genetically modified, so the super duper now genetically improved herbicide-resistant cotton, and then without the opportunity to save their own seed, they went belly up in a year or two, because the company lured them into this venture by providing the inputs of production the first year. But then they developed also the genetic technique to make sure that the hybrid seed cannot even produce viable seed to be stored and planted the next year. So I give you the seed this year, next year you come to the store and you buy it. And you buy it at my price. So here now agriculture, seed conservation enmeshes also with that gigantic monster that we call, globalization, for which farming communities across political boundaries and barriers all around the world have been affected big time. And the United States of America has not been immune to this. Okay, so it's not only a challenge, just to use a mild term, even though sometimes I think it's more of a tragedy, to see the shrinking of small family farms because of economic and financial problems that the farmer is pressured to resolve by going to the bank and every year gambling like for enormous amount of money, right? Without knowing what is going to happen, because now also the product is not a product that is not fulfilling the need of the local market, but is now competing with the whole world. And so it's really hard to withstand this. But this to get to the point that everything started with a seed. Okay? So we gave confidence, and we continue to give a lot of confidence to the holy people, so to speak, but I'm quite sarcastic using this term, barricaded within their institutes of research and laboratories that continue to play deity by cutting and pasting portions of DNA from one species to the next, we have a policy system that, at least in this country, is still, in my opinion, extremely ambiguous. Look what has been going on with the Dark Act. So we as consumers of food, we want to know what we ingest, right? But we still have problems to be told by law, if we are producing GE crops, we are not given the opportunity to make a choice when we go to buy food at the grocery store. We are continually being told that there is nothing to fear, right? Everything is under control because a genetic canola plant, a genetically engineered canola plant, is just a canola plant. But that doesn't happen when Monsanto, for example, goes to the patent office. Because now the scientist has discovered maybe a piece of DNA that makes the transgenic canola plant maybe resist to a disease much better and wants to be paid for that. Okay, so this is also, I think, illogical, right? Because in a way, yes, they would tell you there is no difference. A genetically engineered plant is just a normal plant, nothing to fear. But the same story is not told when there is money, a patenting being brought to the table. So again, in early farming communities, the seed was passed on from generation to generation. This is what we call landrace seed varieties. Okay, so if you go and look at a corn plant, at a corn field, for example, in Mexico or in Guatemala, the few that may be left, because also Mexico has been investing, making big steps ahead in GE agriculture, you would see a lot of heterogeneity in the field. So plants of different heights, producing ears of different colors, different sizes, okay? That is the biological strength of doing agriculture. But that is perceived and criticized as the weakness of modern agriculture, because modern agriculture wants uniformity. Okay? So I can legitimize this kind of criticism, but for the sake of uniforming now a seed that will provide us with a population of plants the following growing season, we are still heavily addicted on agrochemical products, fresh water for irrigation. Believe it or not, more than the 50% of non-renewable fossil energy goes into agriculture. So another great movie you should watch, maybe the next time, is Food Inc. Okay? What I remember from that documentary is that every time you eat breakfast, lunch, and supper, is like if every one of us would drink an entire quart of crude oil. Okay? All the energy that went into eating whatever you are eating in 24 hours in 3 meals. So, what is it? Is it progress or is it madness? Okay? Because again, energy, right? And you are all aware about the discussion that is going on about energy. Right? We are getting that energy. And there are people cheering, well, now we can be almost self-sufficient from the Middle East and Saudi Arabia because we have big pockets of quote-unquote natural gas, like you see on TV, natural gas. Is that CH4? Is carbon that rotted in the ground during the Paleozoic era, okay? The decay of plants, all right? Paleontologists call that period. So we go 350, 400 million years ago. Carboniferous, okay? If you go to a museum of natural history, you may pass through some rooms and they say, welcome to the Carboniferous period of the Paleozoic era. The terrestrial ecosystem was dominated by plants. The decay and the carbon stored in plant tissues and the decay produced by microbial activity, all the coal, all the gas, all the oil that we are still extracting. But then, like I said, we get in that geologic time scale that now I have converted to 365 days at December 31st, 11:59 p.m., okay, while we were still running around the mammoth, okay, almost in the same time, we are building factories. Haber and Bosch and the German chemists figure out all these major technological breakthroughs, and our life becomes dominated by this apparently great progressive chemical approach, okay? Chemical approach that now, since the 1980s, has found a new sexy motif. Let's dismantle the DNA molecule and let's begin to cut it and paste it like you do with the mouse on the computer, you know, when you plagiarize a paper, right? That is what biotechnology, after all, is all about, right? And so you can develop now, I don't know if you've ever seen pictures like watermelons that have been transgenically modified to become more cubical rather than spherical. They studied on that in order to maximize cargo ships or cargo big planes to transport that commodity across the globes, right? We have been, the FDA has just approved a few months ago the transgenic salmon, right? But because here in the United States, many citizens are not still happy not to know exactly what they eat when they go and buy food, that salmon, although is consumed and produced in the Northwest, the transgenic one is not going to be produced in the United States. It's going to be produced in Panama, where it was 2 years ago. Okay? So another thing with this germplasm conservation is that, again, we have converted absolutely the whole model, the whole paradigm of agriculture into big monocultures. And so the monoculture, from a biological standpoint, are absolutely a disaster. And again, you don't need to learn much about that, but with things like we have been learning in the last few years, the disappearance of the monarch butterfly, and now all the things with the pollinators that are disappearing, this is the outcome from the environmental standpoint of an agriculture that has become designed for a gymongous scale, okay? So it's interesting, you know, if I'm looking at the socio-economic and technical approach to, let's say, more ecological types of agriculture, like organic agriculture, I have a higher level of different kind of seed that produce different kind of plant population, whereas in the monoculture, I have only one. It may be just that corn, all right? I have a much higher need for energy in the modern genetically engineered production model than I have in the more ecological type, okay? I do not have, most likely, any animal species in the genetically modified or engineered type of approach, because that kind of approach also aims at a much higher level of specialization. But also what blows me away is that in the GE model, I have a very high amount of information, right? Now, colleges of agriculture are talking about precision agriculture. So you can sit on your big $2 million, I don't know how much it may cost, but those big tractor, you know, all air conditioned, and you just go around, you are on a computer screen, and as you're moving in your field from that computer, you have the technology that tells you on this corner of the field, water stagnates, is not drained as much as on this left. So here, for example, is the rate of herbicide you have to apply. And here, so this maybe one would think more sustainable ways to approach food production. Sure, but what is the cost of that technology? How much that technology remains inextricably linked to our thirst for non-renewable energy, okay? Whereas, instead, in traditional agriculture, biodiversity is what is really helping. So rather than information, what is the strength of an ecological paradigm to food production and seed conservation is knowledge. Knowledge, again, okay? So communities that are still standing are hanging on to that knowledge and making sure that that knowledge through the seed is passed to the next generation. So when I think about seed, I also think about knowledge. I also think about culture. I'm a product of the culture of a college of agriculture of the 20th century. And as I'm reflecting on what product I became, I can say it with great pride that I'm happy. Perhaps I was even lucky to end up in a career path where I dealt primarily with biology, ecology, and environmental science. But that also made me reflect on how biased our education system has become. Because again, we think that to be progressive, we need to become specialists. And so, as a product of the College of Agriculture, I can tell you that as I was studying agronomy, okay, you didn't really know much about what was going on in the Department of Dairy Science. And if you were studying about dairy science, not necessarily you might have had soil fertility classes, or you might have been taught how to identify unwanted plants in the cultivated field. Plants that we call weeds, which from the English language goes back to the Middle Ages, weeds. That means something bad, something notorious to do something really bad to you. In Italian we say malerba, in Spanish mala hierba, in French mauvais herbe. So it's something like you are even touching and you, my goodness, you may gonna die. But that's not true. Because many of these weeds not only increase the biodiversity of the cultivated field in small ecological farms. I have to stop, I'm just finishing here. I love this conversation. Well, this monologue. No, we're going to have a conversation. but these weeds are the biodiversity that maintain the resiliency, you know, of small ecological farms. And this is really the strength for preserving our seeds and with them our future. So I'll stop here. I've been good, Thank you.
Thank you, Bruno. And we will hear from him later also. Bruno reminded us of seed as humility, cooperation, patience, a couple other words. Hope, community, growth and development, tenacity. So, because the seed, he has offered us some ideas on that, we would like to invite ourselves to commune with seed for about 20 minutes. We will have a chance all day to talk to people and hear them. But let us hear from seed what seed wants to tell us. And so we are inviting those of you that can to enjoy the outdoors. We did this last year and people really liked it. It was a chance to absorb feelings about seed. Last year we did soil, but this year seed. To commune, to hear, what is seed telling you, telling us? So we would ask you to do this in quiet, to leave it quiet if you're going to go outside. If you cannot go outside, We ask that you keep quiet in here. You can stay here or maybe walk there's, if you go out this way or out that way, there are passages. You can walk a couple blocks, actually. And then we will ring a bell outside and in here, and we will follow that up with a break at that time, so if you want to get coffee or the restrooms. And maybe during that time, if you had any questions so far of Bruno, you could write them down, and Michelle and Donna will collect them at your tables. Just leave them at your tables, or when they come around, they'll find them, because we will have a question and answer period after our table conversation. So, let us pause again in quiet and welcome all that we have heard and feel about seed, and take that with us. And we'll come back here for the coffee break at, I think it's 4:40, yes, 10:45.